Anime Recapped here. Today I'm going to explain an action fantasy anime called Goblin Slayer. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. As always, it's a busy day in the Adventurers Guild. There are talks of demons, evil spirits, and manticores, so all in all, you know you're in for a regular Tuesday. But amidst these hard-boiled and experienced adventurers is a young and assuming-looking girl. She approaches the guild girl and applies to be an adventurer. The girl is a 15-year-old priestess. Since coming of age, she has decided to leave the temple and help other adventurers in need. The guild girl explains that adventurers may hold one of 10 ranks. Gold rank adventurers are like legends who have helped resolve problems at the national level, while silver ranked adventurers and below are left to traverse the wilderness. Then the priestess receives a porcelain tag, indicating that she's a rank 10 or a newbie adventurer. After getting her tag, the priestess is immediately approached by a 3-membered group, consisting of a fighter, a witch, and a warrior. They eagerly ask her to join them in their urgent quest to kill the goblins that wrecked a village by stealing its supplies and women. Goblins are monsters that can see well in the dark, and well, that's about it. They're the weakest type of monsters whose size, prowess, and intelligence are comparable to a human child's, so their strength lies in numbers. Though the priestess is hesitant to join them, the warrior convinces her by displaying his steadfast confidence that they can kill those horrid creatures. Late at night, they venture off and find a cave which could be housing the goblins. The priestess remains doubtful of the entire thing, and asks the team if they should prepare first, but the warrior brushes off her worries since goblins are the weakest creatures you can run into. They continue onwards and into the cave, and in her nervousness, the priestess ends up walking slowly to pray, which irks the witch behind her and makes them lag behind the warrior and the fighter. As the witch reprimands her, they hear a noise coming from a distance. Suddenly, the goblins emerge from behind and attack them. With her spell of flame, the witch manages to kill one, but there are still too many of them. Overwhelmed, she gets tackled to the ground by the foul creatures, and with her staff taken away from her, the witch gets stabbed in the stomach. She retches in sheer pain while the priestess screams in horror. Finally, the warrior and fighter return to them, with the warrior immediately springing into action. He swings his sword recklessly and destructively at the goblins, instructing the fighter to look after the others while the priestess tries to heal the witch. But for all the warrior's vicious efforts, the goblins overwhelm him with sheer number, and they brutalize him right before his party's eyes. Despite her terror, the fighter steps up to continue the warrior's fight. She tells the two to run, while the priestess remains confused why the witch hasn't recovered yet. The fighter uses martial arts to make quick work of the enemies, but as she's throwing her kicks, a larger and stronger goblin catches her foot, then throws her to the wall. Tragically, the fighter suffers a crueler fate as the goblins all force themselves on her, while all she can do is cry for the priestess to run. The priestess tearfully escapes with the unconscious witch, but she's forced to stop when she sees that the witch is getting worse. While trying to heal her again, a goblin suddenly shoots an arrow at her shoulder. Helplessly, the priestess moves away from the pack, and with fear etched in her eyes, she can only watch as the goblins brutally attack the critically wounded witch. The others start surrounding the priestess, who had wet herself in sheer fear. But just when they're ready to maul her, a man clad in metal armor suddenly reveals himself. He punches, bashes, torches, and slashes at the goblins with violent ease, dealing death to them like it's second nature. Rip and tear until the only thing the goblins feared was him. It doesn't take long before he's eliminated all these putrid monsters. He walks closer to the crying priestess, his silver tag catching her attention and prompting her to ask who he is. Goblin Slayer, he answers. Painfully, he pulls out an arrow from the priestess's shoulder, then ushers her to use a healing potion. Though she's pained, she rejects it and asks that she give it to the witch instead. Unfortunately, the Goblin Slayer deduces that it's too late as the witch has been poisoned. Despite her protests, the Goblin Slayer stabs the witch, fully killing her. The priestess has no choice but to drink the potion herself, and the Slayer asks if her group encountered a big goblin. With a shaky voice, she confirms this, and he informs her that the creature is called a hobgoblin. As the silver-ranked adventurer moves forth to eliminate the rest of the goblins, the priestess insists on coming with him. She explains that she's received the miracles, Minor Heal and Holy Light, which has 2 more uses for the day. The Goblin Slayer agrees to let her go with him, and while they're talking, he slices the stomach of an already dead goblin, leaving her confused and horrified. He explains that goblins have a great sense of smell, especially for women, so they have to mask their scent. Though she's repulsed by this, the priestess braves through the ordeal as the Slayer swipes the goblin's putrid blood all over her. Before they enter a tunnel, he sets up a road trap and tells her to cast her Holy Light. The priestess immediately chants her spell, emitting a blinding light that obstructs the vision of the goblins just ahead of the tunnel. The Goblin Slayer immediately takes advantage of this and charges in. He swiftly kills the leader of the pack, the shaman, before bolting towards the entrance with the priestess while the hobgoblin runs after them. Just as it's closing in on them, the Slayer orders the priestess to chant again. As the bright luminescence catches the huge goblin off guard, it topples over, and the Slayer promptly kills it. The priestess is distressed since she's all out of magic, but the Goblin Slayer responds with a simple, "I know." He pours gasoline in the hobgoblin then kicks it, making it roll towards the other goblins. With that, he lights them on fire, incinerating them. They travel deep into the cave, where the priestess finds the traumatized fighter still alive. The priestess tearfully embraces her, promising her she's safe now. But before they leave, the Goblin Slayer notices a chair made of bones. He destroys it, revealing a secret door that houses a group of newborn goblins, huddling and crying together. The Goblin Slayer comments that goblins multiply fast. It won't take them long for them to multiply to 50. Perturbed, the priestess asks if he will kill these newborns too. The Goblin Slayer stoically answers that he has to. These newborns are survivors who will never forget their hatred for humans. There isn't a single reason to let them live. Despite all that she's went through, the priestess still argues that one of them may be a good goblin. Unmoved, the Goblin Slayer answers, with his ever unchanging tone. There might be a good goblin if we looked, but I think only good goblins are the ones who never come out of their stinking holes. With that, he delivers a death sentence to all the young goblins. After everything, the priestess ruminates over what happened back in town. It's a tale as old as time. Goblins raiding villages, stealing their women, rookies taking on the job order only to get slaughtered, rescued girls falling in despair and joining temples, the lone survivor returning home only to never be heard from again. She wonders if such harrowing and life-shattering incidents truly are common. The priestess doesn't know how to answer that, but there are two things she knows for certain. One, that she's an adventurer. The second, she doesn't say what it is, but with a determined smile, she joins the Goblin Slayer in his next adventure. Some time passes, and the Goblin Slayer is resting in a humble farm where a young redhead woman and her uncle live. Early in the morning, he checks for any goblin footprints in the area since they're moved around at night while the redhead has a friendly conversation with him. Though he only gives one-word responses, he always answers to everything she says. When the Slayer leaves for town, she tags along with him. While chatting about goblins, she comments that it must be great to have plenty of work, but the Goblin Slayer solemnly responds that he'd rather there'd be no goblins at all. Meanwhile at the guild, a frail old man desperately files a quest. There have been goblins hunting their village, and he worries for his daughter since she's the only woman there. He gives the guild girl a few coins. She's left in a bleak mood because of this, and she thinks about how goblin quests pay poorly, which turns off experienced adventurers for them. Because of this, the fresh-faced adventurers are the ones who take the job, and they end up getting overwhelmed and killed. But since the job eventually gets done by the second or third party that show up, the state does nothing about it. Then the Goblin Slayer arrives, immediately prompting the people there to start talking about him. Some adventurers comment on how filthy he looks, while the others look down on him for never fighting anything that's bigger than a goblin. They even question his status as a silver rank. A good deal of the adventurers is a prideful bunch, and they don't take goblins seriously at all. Meanwhile, the redhead observes the priestess approaching the Goblin Slayer to tell him that she doesn't appreciate setting the goblins on fire since that could have set off an avalanche, and the Goblin Slayer simply answers that goblins are the bigger problem. He then quizzes her on the art of goblin war until it's time for him to take a job order. With that, the Slayer bids the redhead goodbye. That night, the Goblin Slayer is with the priestess as he orchestrates a medley of carnage upon the goblins for the quest. Perhaps if you were to ask the Slayer why he hunts only goblins, he might ask you to imagine this. Goblins ransacking your village, killing your family, friends. Then they torture your kind and beloved sister, defile her, kill her, leave your family's bodies lying there while you watch, terrified beyond comprehension. From where you're hidden, you are the survivor. You can never forgive them. How can you? When your suffering has contorted your being beyond recognition, turned you into another tired trope. You take up weapons, do whatever you can to get revenge. You kill them, again and again, just as they've killed you. You don't stop there. You keep hunting and killing these goblins until you perfect the art, until you learn to relish in it. A kind moron will suggest that you let the children live, not realizing that these things will grow up to attack villages and steal livestock to survive. Then the goblins that survived, that gained experience, become wanderers, become the leaders or bodyguards of nests. This means that the Goblin Slayer, in turn, is a goblin to them. The cycle continues, the killing continues, but this time he has the priestess with him, who helps him take quicker care of the goblins with her miracles, and when everything's done, she kneels down to pray. That same night, the redhead's uncle approaches her while she's deep in thought. He reiterates that he knows that she and the Goblin Slayer were childhood friends, but he's completely lost it now. He isn't the person he used to be. Despite that, she insists on waiting a little longer. Years ago, the redhead had a fight with the young Slayer since he was secretly upset that she was leaving for the city while he couldn't come. His sister broke up their fight and comforted him. The redhead left with her uncle and the Slayer didn't even see her off. They didn't make up, so her uncle told her to patch things up with him when she got back. Unfortunately, there was nothing but the dead for her to come back to. She's yet to apologize until now. It's hard to. But when the Slayer drops by their farm one morning, she welcomes him warmly. She asks if he wants her to fix him up a meal. He agrees. A long time ago, the gods of light, order and fate, and the gods of darkness, chaos, and coincidence decided to throw dice to determine which side would rule the world. They threw the dice over and over again until they felt faint. In the Adventurers Guild, a high elf asks the guild girl for a certain orc bulk. When the guild girl doesn't recognize the name, her dwarf companion jokes about her funny talk before asking her a man called Beard Cutter. But again, the guild girl doesn't recognize the name. With the elf and the dwarf bickering, a huge lizardman appears behind them, and after reprimanding his companions, he apologizes to the guild girl for their behavior. This is certainly an odd ensemble of silver-ranked adventurers, seeing as the high elf archer and the dwarf shaman are ancestral foes, while lizardmen are very rare to come across. The lizardman then clarifies that in human tongue, they're looking for a man dubbed as the Goblin Slayer, and if you speak of the Slayer, he shall appear. And the three are shocked to learn that he's the man they're looking for. At the trio's insistence, the Slayer goes to talk with him, but he leaves the Priestess behind, asking her to rest. Another young party approaches the Priestess, and they ask her to go with them instead of the Slayer, who's probably just using her as bait. But before the Priestess could defend her companion, a sultry, slow-speaking silver-ranked witch cuts in, shooing the young adventurers away. With them gone, the witch teases the Priestess about the Slayer, saying that being with him must be hard since he's odd and dense. She then shares a time when she got an odd request from him since he needed some help with a scroll because, again, he's odd. The witch repeats that it must be hard to be with the Slayer. With a small voice, the Priestess admits to this. Since she can barely keep up with him, she wonders if she should just leave him alone. With a thoughtful smile, the witch starts explaining that the Slayer's been fighting nothing but goblins for years without rest. And while that's good for the world, the capital is full of demons and other monsters. If she wants to keep helping others, she can join those young adventurers who invited her. But in the end, she encourages the Priestess to make her own decision on who she wants to be with. There are no wrong paths after all. In a room, the Goblin Slayer is seated in front of the multiracial party, and the High Elf makes it clear that she doubts his ability because of his appearance, but the dwarf defends the Slayer's unclean look and stresses its practicality and functionality. Then he adds that she should learn from him as her elder. Alas, the dwarf just set up a trap for himself with that one, as it's revealed that the High Elf is 2,000 years old, while the dwarf is just 107. Her laugh rings through the room, and the elf roasts him for looking old as balls while being 2 millennia her junior. Again, the lizardman interrupts their quarrel, allowing the Goblin Slayer to finally ask what they want from him. The High Elf starts explaining that a lot of demons have appeared near the capital, which she assumes he knows. Nope. The Slayer responds. Growing more impatient, she adds that it's due to the resurrection of the Demon King, who's building an army to take over the world. I see, the Slayer says. Then almost begrudgingly, the High Elf tries telling him that they want his help, but he cuts her off saying, "Ask someone else. I hunt goblins or nothing else." The High Elf's temper rises through the roof as she yells about how the world's at stake. The Slayer simply responds that he knows, but before the demons can destroy the world, the goblins will destroy the villages. After all, the world being in danger isn't an excuse to let the goblins live. With the High Elf seething because of the Slayer's nonchalance, the Lizardman interjects and tells him that they do, in fact, want him to kill some goblins. And just like that, the Slayer agrees and asks where and how many they are and if there are any shamans or hobs. The Lizardman goes on to explain that the head honchos of the dwarves, elves, and lizard folk held a conference because of the Demon King's resurrection. When the dwarf mentions that the goblins have been growing more active in the Elflands, the Slayer asks if any goblin champions have emerged. The Lizardman says that they found a large nest, and the High Elf adds that if the elves were to try and eliminate it, the human kings might think that they're plotting something. And so the three of them have to ask for the Goblin Slayer's help, seeing as he's human. With all that out of the way, the Goblin Slayer acquires a map to the nest and tells them that they can pay him however much they choose before going, leaving the other three surprised that he plans on going alone. Likewise, the Priestess is also surprised when he informs her that he won't be taking her to this quest. Instead of backing down, she shyly tells him that he should discuss with her first before deciding, to which the Slayer retorts, "Aren't I?" With a smile on the Priestess's face, she tells him that it's not much of a discussion if he's already decided himself. She then wears a resolute look on her face as she announces, "I'm coming with you. I can't leave you alone." And to this, the Goblin Slayer tells her to do as she wishes. The Priestess happily follows the Slayer, and since the trio can't just stand back and watch him do all the work, they tag along too. The Goblin Slayer always had a laser-tight focus on his goals and self-imposed purpose. He's always so sure of himself. But like the uncertain, second-guessing, and inexperienced Priestess, he still has much to learn. Together, they'll brave the cruel and beautiful world, not just as adventurers, but as Goblin Slayers too.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.